We are in Cape Town, South Africa, with 3 members of the Elders Group and an audience waiting to cross-question them. Welcome to South2North. Welcome to South2North. I'm Ridi Kabi, bringing you the second special edition of the show from Cape Town. We're here discussing some of the world's most pressing problems with leaders from the distinguished group of elders at the District 6 Museum in Cape Town. Now, this space stands as an emblem to the thousands of people forcefully relocated under the apartheid regime in South Africa. In the audience, I have with me 200 people from the global south and further afield. They're here to question some of the world's most influential voices. But who are the elders and can they actually make a difference? On our panel today, we have former US President and Nobel Peace Laureate, Jimmy Carter. Former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, who also served as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And former President of Finland, also another Nobel Peace Laureate, Martti Ahtisaari. This is your conversation, your questions to the panelists. Let's start with you, Nkosinathi George Madu. You're from a crime prevention organization. What's your question this evening?
I'm concerned about the sustainability of the elders. We have seen in Africa that most of the leaders are corrupt. My question, is it not high time or necessary now that we have African courts or tribunal that is to deal with these corrupt leaders?
Let's start with you, President Carter.
It would be nice to have a court for Africa, but I don't think that's possible because no sovereign nation would abide by a ruling by the entire, say, African Union that would intercede in their own domestic affairs and remove a president who has been elected by the people. So I think that the hope is good and the wish might be justifiable to remove some that stay in there too long, but I think the sovereignty of countries would override any sort of regional effort to remove a president elected by the people in a country.
Ironically, some members of the African Union feel that the ICC is an African court. It's there to just try African leaders. What do you say to that? Is the ICC racist?
In fact, it was very good that so many African countries supported the International Criminal Court, as I do, even though there may be some issues now. The court itself has as its priority strengthening national systems. And the court actually acknowledges that if people can be tried in their own country, this may be the best solution. And that is part of the approach of the court. If you domesticate the legislation and have a good court system, then those who are accused of serious crimes can be tried at home. But the International Court is also very important as a way of ending impunity, ending the real problem, and it is a very real problem, of those who get away with terrible violations of human rights, terrible sexual violence, terrible crimes against humanity. And I know that there is a view at the moment that Africa has been singled out, and I actually think that justice must be seen to be done. And I'm very strong of the view that we need to ensure that the court is seen as a court of justice and a fair court. And I actually very much encourage the justice systems in countries, the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, and a possible African court. I know what Jimmy is saying, you can't take a leader out of a country, but actually the stronger the African judicial system, both nationally and a Pan-African system is, the better. And then the International Criminal Court will be the exception.
Your view, President Ahtisaari, given that there's some people who'd like to see some Western leaders tried by the ICC? Yes, you agree?
The mere fact that some people feel that not everyone who should be in Hague has been brought to Hague does not mean that we should abolish the International Criminal Court. Hopefully, all those who deserve to be taken there will be taken there in due course.
President Carter?
Well, you have to remember that most of the people brought to justice so far have been delivered by their own people. For instance, in the case of Charles Taylor in Liberia, it was a group of women who were committed to justice that brought an end to his administration, elected another person to be president. Now he's been sentenced to 50 years in prison. And I remember that Milosevic, who was the president of Serbia, was in trial, and he died while he was still on trial. And Karadzic and Mladic, both of them from the same area, former Yugoslavia, have been tried through the international judicial system. So it's not singled out on Africa. And I think the main thing that an international court does is not to punish people after they've committed crimes, but to try to prevent crimes being happening by the threat of punishment if they do commit those atrocities.
There was a lot of enthusiasm from this side. Do you think some US citizens should bring in former presidents to the ICC for the war in Iraq? And
I think enough is said. Please go ahead.
Alison Lazarus, you have a question also on the AU and the ICC.
What might the elders think about their support or action for citizens' arrests?
Citizens' arrest is a way of bringing people to justice. And I think what is really important is that a system be seen to be fair. And there are problems now of a perception. And I think we have to acknowledge that and seek to address it. We have to be fair in this. The questions are about African leaders being brought to trial. But Martti Ahtisaari and I serve on a foundation about African leadership, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. We're both on the prize committee, and I happen to be on the board. And in the course of the 7 years of the foundation, 3 African leaders have been singled out for exemplary leadership. So there is exemplary leadership also in Africa. Joachim Chissano for the role that he played in Mozambique. Festus Mukai for the role he played in Botswana, and former President Piro for the role he played in Cape Verde. Now, these are names that should be better known in Africa because they are inspirational leaders, and we are very glad to be able to champion them. So, yes, we want justice. Yes, we want fairness. One of the things as High Commissioner for Human Rights that I found most difficult was a perception of double standards. And there is that perception from time to time. And we always have to combat it, but in the interest of pursuing justice.
President Ahtisaari?
In a recent interview, I said, I compared to how it is to be a president in Europe and in Africa. I said I was delighted to be in my own country, Finland, president for 6 years, because I may not have had those powers that many of the African presidents had, but I had institutions that could actually do if we decided that some improvements should be carried out. I think it's much more complicated to be a president in Africa because in many countries the institutions that are absolutely vital to run the country properly are not there. And I think, so I would say that it's a normal thing if we don't find anyone who deserves to get the $5 million prize that Mo Ibrahim is prepared to keep. Because as Mary said, we are looking for exceptional leadership. And it's much more complicated. In all fairness, one has to say it's much more complicated on African continent.
President Carter, let me ask you this. The US is not a signatory to the ICC, and recently we've had some African countries threatening to walk out. Does the ICC still have credibility, do you think?
Well, I think it does. I think the ICC does have credibility, and the United States, although unfortunately it hasn't ratified the agreement, it was signed by American President Bill Clinton, but the Senate has not yet ratified it. But I think that the United States is now depending on the ICC to do the justice work, because it's important to have that kind of supervision over extremely serious crimes like genocide or crimes of war. So I think the United States does support it, and I think it's a worthwhile organization.
Chad, you have a question. Where are you? You're sitting on my right.
My question tonight to the elders is, can children's rights universally be guaranteed?
And I think that's a very important one if you consider the problem of child soldiers, the rape as a weapon of war in the DRC, with children being at the receiving end of this horrendous crime. Let's start with you, President Ahtisaari. Let's start with you.
First of all, allow me a bit of advertisement that I come from a country or part of the world where egalitarian policies are the norm. In other words, that it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, you get a decent education, you get a decent health care. I think it's extremely important that we see to it that these egalitarian policies are carried out throughout the world. Because we are looking very carefully what sort of elections are organized. We pay far less attention to what are those who come even through good elections to power. Are they running egalitarian policies and using the wealth of the nation to give a chance for young people and girls as much as boys? Or are they more interested in enriching themselves? I think that's what the citizens have to stand up.
President Carter?
The problem is that the disparity in wealth and status within a country. I noticed that Archbishop Tutu pointed out that perhaps the worst in the world, I don't know the statistics, is in Africa, the disparity between the richest and the poorest. And I think the equal sharing, which is justice, is one of the prime characteristics of leadership. We should have justice and love mercy and walk humbly with your God. That's the advice that we get as Christians. So I think the treatment of poor people on an equal basis with the rich people in education and also in health care and in housing and things of that kind is the best guarantee that there won't be the discrimination that you describe for young people.
You have a follow-up question?
It is quite a trend that people almost, there's a term to say, speak left, you walk right. So people talk about, use very pretty words, speak about egalitarianism, and they talk about it. But my question is, current political paradigms show stagnancy in catering for social change. Gender inequality, vast economic disparity, and the selective appropriation of human rights are seen as hallmarks of current systems of power. The revolution in Egypt, mass protests in Brazil are only recent indicators of this social unrest that we are experiencing globally. Is there still hope for the current systems of power? Or is radical social change honestly a better bet for achieving any real social equity?
No, first of all, I think we all observed what was happening in those so-called Arab Spring countries. If anyone in their right mind thought that the outcome of that would be democracy in those societies, then we are daydreaming. Democracy is not born overnight. And I wish they would have waited with the elections also longer and not rushed to the elections as they did. Because it was also known that the only organized force was Muslim Brotherhood. Good for them. They had been not having a chance in earlier elections in the country. So it didn't come, at least as a surprise to me, who would win the elections if you rush so quickly there. So, but I think the most important thing what happened in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia and other countries is that those who rebelled, they made it known to the world that the values they were asking for in their own society are universal values. And I think they expect from us and everybody else from the democratic world to stand up with them and see that they have a right to the same rights that we have.
Just to follow up on that, regardless of the outcome of the Arab Spring, do you think those actions in those countries, Egypt, Tunisia, did they send a strong message to world leaders?
I think they sent a great message, to be honest, because they sent a message of universal. They sent a message of universal human rights, of a desire for fairness, end of discrimination, tackling joblessness, but also voice. That these were young people who said, we want to have our voice heard, we want to live in a democracy, we want to see change. And there is good reason for young people in our world today to protest, because we've had a lot of problems, and we have divides that are opening up. We don't have enough good models of governance that is for the people, that respects the fundamental first article of the Universal Declaration, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And I heard on the streets of Tunisia, first of all, and then Cairo, that call for dignity and rights. And I think it's a very basic sense in people all over the world. And sometimes they say, no, these values are Western values. I think it was extremely important that they were Arab values, that they're African values, that they're values of all over the world. And that's the universal Declaration of Human Rights. Nobody has championed that more than Jimmy Carter. He's my hero when it comes to championing the Universal Declaration.
A year ago, the elders were in Egypt, and one of our most exciting meetings was with a group of young people. And they were bragging on the fact that they had broken down barriers between themselves and older people, between Christians and Muslims, between Egyptians and Syrians and those in Libya, with their freedom. And that freedom was precious to them. And they were looking forward to a stable constitution. They were looking forward to another election that would be honest and fair, as that one was, by the way. And then came the coup, and the government has now been destroyed. We don't know what's going to happen next. They're preparing a constitution, but the excitement of those young people when they did have in their grasp, at least for a few months, the same values that all of us cherish was really exciting to all of us. And they were so proud of the fact that they were now equal not only to each other within Egypt, but also equal to the outside world. That has been dashed as far as their promises are concerned. They're all dismayed now, but I hope that they'll see that in the future. And the other thing is that we have to be patient with these countries that are struggling for freedom. It took them a year to get a constitution, and they were criticized by some people in my country because it took them so long to get a constitution. It took the United States 12 years to get a constitution after we declared our independence. So the Africans were doing very well compared to those in the United States.
Well, going back to the message from the Arab Spring, I think one of the messages is that people are more powerful than their governments. Do you agree on that? Citizens are more powerful than the government. We have a question at the back there.
My question to the elders is enough done, and what is being done to ensure that young people in war-torn regions such as Syria and DRC Congo are being educated, hence being given the chance to rebuild their countries?
Mary? We'll give you this one, Mary.
Yeah, I'm very affected by that question because, in fact, children are not in school in large parts of eastern Congo because of the rebel groups, because of fighting that has taken place there. Women are not safe, they are raped and re-raped, but it's children who lose that possibility of being in education, of being able to be children who can learn and enjoy learning. And it is one of the tragedies of conflict and one of the reasons why we have to address the issue. And as a special envoy to the Great Lakes, the reason that I'm completely motivated is this has been going on, some would say, since 1960, but in particular, since the genocidal killing in Rwanda in 1994. I went there as head of state in 1994, as the first head of state to go. And I went back in 1995 and I saw the beginnings of that problem in Goma with the refugees and some of the genocidaires hiding in the refugee camps and then dispersing into eastern Congo. And so this has been a problem not just for the generation of now, but for children and women and their families, in particular, in eastern DRC. And it's why we need to remind ourselves of the rights, the right to education, the right to a normal life, the need to address conflict. And at the moment, there is a framework of leadership of 11 heads of state who've committed, and the 4 institutions, the United Nations, the African Union, Conference of the Great Lakes, and SADC. We will be having a meeting in Pretoria in a few days' time, on the 4th of November, of joint Conference of the Great Lakes and SADC, precisely in support of moving forward on the Great Lakes. And hopefully, moving forward with, in our minds, the children who need to be at school, the mothers who need to be safe, the girls who need not to be raped, the children who need not to be raped, because that is the problem. And I think that's the very strong motivation.
Margot, you have a question about human rights and access to health. Margot?
There's a worldwide pandemic of diabetes. More people are dying of diabetes than HIV and AIDS. There is a severe lack of resources for diabetes. Is there a plan for treating diabetes in Africa?
I think that's a huge problem that we're beginning to really understand, that diabetes is a huge issue in various parts of the developing world. We were talking about it this morning in Mexico. It's a huge problem, and it's a huge health problem, and there does need to be much more attention to it. And it's really, I think, a case of understanding, from my point of view, I take a rights-based approach to health. And when we have issues of access to healthcare, as we had with HIV, the fact that people must have the access to proper treatment. Unfortunately, because of lifestyles, because of sodas, because of wrong food choices, diabetes is much more of a problem than it used to be. And I think there's a sort of corporate responsibility issue which also has to be tackled there. And I think that's an important dimension.
President Ahtisaari?
Particularly on diabetes 1, which is a children's diabetes, there seems to be now, I read quite recently, that there has been a breakthrough, and there is an expectation that we get a medication in a year's time. So if that is the case, that's a major good news.
We are about to wrap our discussion up, but one question, Peter Gabriel, Richard Branson, you are the founders of the Elders. You advised Nelson Mandela to start the Elders. What are your thoughts about the prospects and the work that the Elders is doing?
It's been amazing, extraordinarily exciting for us to see what has been done. I think we sit back in awe at all these meetings, because it's incredible to hear what's going on and how some of these problems are being dealt with. My personal passion is that the digital world and the world that is coming to us through the mobile phone is going to transform pretty much every field. And if we can make connections there for the Elders, I think the work will be amplified and will reach many millions more.
Richard?
Well, I think a lot of people felt that the world needed an incredible group of global statesmen who had put their egos behind them, who'd put politics behind them, and who were willing to devote their lives to looking after the people of the world, and who had no axes to grind, who weren't trying to get elected. And I think the Elders have played a wonderful role in the last 4 years. It's been a wonderful start, and we hope that in that in 2 or 3
I thought it was 6 actually.
Oh, last 6 years. Anyway, we hope that in a couple of 100 years' time there won't be need for the Elders, but and that they will resolve all conflicts. But if not, hopefully the Elders will still be going in 200 or 300 years' time.
Well, I would say as long as we have countries where women are told that they can't drive because it affects their ovaries, and yes, as long as we have that, then we do need an active citizenry and the Elders. So let me thank you. There's never enough time to take all the questions, so very, very sorry to those of you who still have your arms raised, but we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, President Jimmy Carter, for joining us on South to North. Mary Robinson, a pleasure to have you on South to North. And of course, President Martti Ahtisaari, thank you for joining us as well. You were a wonderful audience, and thank you for coming through today. That brings us to the end of our 2-week special from Cape Town. Now, to continue the debate, please tweet your questions, comments, and opinions to @AJ South2North, or find us on Facebook. From me, Ridi Klabi, and the South2North team, wherever you are, goodbye.